welcome to Show Studio. It's our first panel discussion of Paris Fashion Week, and it's also a fabulous show that we're going to be discussing because we're focusing on Gareth Pugh's Spring/Summer 14 collection. We've also got an amazing and very diverse panel with me, but I'll let you guys introduce yourselves, starting with you, Camilla.
I'm Camilla Johnson-Hill, founder and director of the Production Club and a contributing editor of Interview magazine.
I'm Nick Knight, I'm the director of Show Studio.
I'm Princess Julia, and I do many things.
I'm Roger Tredre, I'm a tutor in fashion journalism at Central St Martin's, and our host, I had the privilege of trying to teach her for a while.
You're like a proud parent, Roger.
I am, really, I am.
You're also a journalist as well.
Yes.
Very good one.
Occasion.
Let's start by talking a little bit about Gareth. And Nick, I'm going to put you on the spot first.
Oh, good.
Because you know Gareth very well, you've worked with Gareth. What do you find so inspiring about what he does?
Lots of things. Personally, I find him a very beautiful and a very inspiring man. Mm-hmm. I think he's very poetic in his nature and his physique. I like it when people look like their work. I think Gareth physically looks like his work. I think you sense him in his own work, which I think is always interesting for an artist. In terms of what he creates in fashion, I think it's really important that we have fashion designers that propose that new vision of women, that don't fall back on perhaps some of the more tried and tested visions of women. I like the fact that he is dark in his vision, that he's bold in his vision, that his women look powerful. I like the fact that there are new shapes he proposes. Many things, really.
Mm-hmm. I'm interested in you say you like that there's sort of a darkness to his vision, and I'd be interested to get some of your other thoughts on that. Do you think that great designers have to have an element of the kind of something a bit dark? I think a good example of that would be McQueen, but even maybe Marc Jacobs, there's always something a little bit subversive. I don't know, Roger, you're looking like you're considering
rebellious.
that. Yeah, rebellious.
That's a fascinating subject. I mean, it's sort of the essence of, you know, what is great about London fashion, isn't it? Because in a way, a lot of people come to London for that kind of darkness that they don't tend to get elsewhere. You know, you go to Milan and, well, Milan's trying hard this season, actually, so I shouldn't be too rude about Milan, but it has for some seasons been very straightforward commercial fashion. Clothes for people to wear. But in London, you know, the obsession with clothes for people to wear isn't there, you know, and that's what's made London very exciting and seen it grow and grow and grow. And what is thrilling about Gareth's work is how he started with that very, very uncompromising aesthetic, which he hasn't compromised in any way, but has kind of matured it, and it's become more and more adult, and hopefully we'll see that today. We'll see something that really sort of still retains that youthful, aggressive energy that Nick was one of the first to recognise, and then we'll see something that also has grown up and turned into something very special for now.
Julia, what are your thoughts on Gareth? Have you followed his work? What do you think about him?
Yes, I've been friends with him from the
exactly.
beginning, really, more or less. I like the way that he takes risks with his sort of silhouettes, and you summed it up so well, Nick, actually. I mean, what more can I add?
It's going to be an I agree with Nick moment.
Yeah. But, and also I've worn some of his clothes on photo shoots and
How do
things.
they make you feel?
Well, I wore the thing from an early collection that you had to actually pump air into.
Excellent.
So it was like a big balloon. Did you ever use that one?
I'm not sure, I did more of the angular things,
Yeah,
but I know
yeah.
what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and so, yeah, I was sort of in this sort of big fabric air balloon, basically, with my head popping out of the top. Which
Did
was,
you wear it on
most
the catwalk, or
amusing.
did you wear it as
I
a photo
actually think
shoot?
that James Jeanette Main has actually worn it on the door of a club.
But did you wear it, or did you?
Why were you
No, I wore it in a photo shoot.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, I find his work entertaining as well, actually. And there is that dark side to what he does, but it's also, like, quite hysterical. When he did that collection with the, you know, Klaus Nomi style neon coat, you know, very angular,
Really
but
angular,
it
yeah.
actually was really, like, hilarious as well.
No,
In a good way,
yeah.
you know.
I'm interested in this idea of subversion. I'd like to talk to all of you about sort of subcultures inspiring fashion and club culture inspiring fashion, which is really apt for you, Julia, because obviously you've just curated a journey through London subculture at the ICA.
Yeah.
But I just want to talk a little bit about the best designers who've been inspired by those kind of subculture or club cultures. Is there anyone that jumps out for you, Camilla?
Well, Lee McQueen, Gareth, I think there's a little bit of influence in so many of the British designers, as we were just saying. And what I am so excited about seeing this show is so many of the shows so far this season have so many politics in them. I feel like the designers have to answer so many questions, and I just don't think Gareth ever kind of goes down that route, and there's a freedom to what he does, and that's what I love seeing.
That's interesting, actually. Who are your kind of highlights, Julia, for people who've taken, or maybe rather than doing it like highlights, what do you think the best way that club culture has inspired fashion is? Because you must have had a great time curating that exhibition, reliving memories. And
well, yes, but the show itself, you know, it starts in 1980, but the conversation goes on to the present day.
Yeah.
And what I found really fascinating was the way that sort of archive material was suddenly sort of emerging, and maybe in people's subconscious ideas, when you're formulating ideas, sort of reappeared in 2 decades later, or reappeared in you know, an architect's vitrine, you know. So it was actually this sort of cross conversation going on that actually sort of only really became apparent when people were filling their vitrines. And a vitrine is like a case, a box, for anyone that's not too sure. There's a fly. In front of my eyes.
What was the point, do you think, because you mentioned it's a conversation that's still going to today, but I question whether, you know, that those days where the St Martin's students would go to the clubs every evening and that was what was inspiring them, they'd spend all of their, like, I think there's an amazing quote, I think it's John Galliano maybe, and he talks about how no one was at college on Fridays because they were all at home making their outfits. Do we still have that, or have we lost that slight sort of club energy to...
I think there's a lot more permission nowadays to go sort of bonkers if you want to. People, yeah, I think there still is that element actually of getting ready, which is always kind of half the fun of going out to a nightclub. I think it's just sort of preparing for it. And when I met Gareth, he was part of the Wow collective, and they had very much that same sensibility actually from my younger years, you know, and we were always very excited to be going out to the clubs that were going on in the noughties. Yeah.
What do you think, Roger?
Well, there've been periods when you felt that club culture was going to like take over fashion. I mean, I'm thinking sort of originally like the 80s, you know, body map and all that, and you just thought that, you know, London Fashion Week was going to be about club fashion entirely, and there've been other periods like that. It's always been very exciting when that's happened, but it's come in waves and come and gone. I always feel a bit awkward talking about club culture because I've never clubbed very much actually. I sometimes, and when these waves come along, I think, what am I doing in fashion? Because I don't club, you know. But I did once get into Blitz actually when I was about 18. I don't know how they let me in. You must have let me in. Probably. I don't know.
The one time I did the door.
I really don't know how I got in because I was...
Were you dressed up as a hero clown?
No, I was a posh, introverted little English public school boy. I was probably wearing my school clothes. Maybe I got
They thought you were being dead ironic.
Yes, I think so, yeah. But anyway, I mean, it's very exciting, the club scene, from an outsider, fascinated by what's coming out of it, and the students I see and teach at St Martin's these days, no, a lot of them aren't going to clubbing actually. But
where are they getting their main inspiration from?
They're getting it from all over, because that's the way the world has changed.
Has the internet
replaced
clubs?
You can at the flick of the switch get your inspiration from anywhere you want, you know. And John Galliano, when I first knew him, got his inspiration from clubbing and from going to libraries. Now he would get it, or any designer could get it from anywhere on the internet instantly. You don't need to go to a library, for God's sake. You don't even need to travel to the places. So the inspirations are diverse and broad, and that's what's exciting. So club is one strand, and Gareth has emerged from that kind of world, and it's really exciting to see, even if, like me, you're a club beginner.
Nick, you've drawn a lot of, well, you've not drawn inspiration from, you've been very excited by subcultures through your work, and I was wondering, why do you think subculture is so important to fashion?
I think it's counterculture rather than just subculture.
Okay.
It's an alternative. I think if you've got anything that sets itself up as the status quo, which what fashion does, it sort of sets up an image saying, you know, you should look like this. I think when there's a predominant status quo, like, I mean, you know, you feel that you're being told to look a certain way, be a certain way, there's always a group of people who think, well, F that, I want to look different. It doesn't feel like me. And I think the more profound the mainstream is, the more prevalent the mainstream is, then the deeper the counterculture and the more interesting the counterculture. So I think it's a sort of reaction against the status quo, which is always interesting.
Do you think
change is always good?
Is that what best fashion is, when it is a reaction and it's pushing change?
No, I find it very difficult to define these things. Really, best fashion is best fashion is what you want personally. The most interesting fashion from an image maker's point of view is often the more flamboyant. It's much harder to photograph a beige trouser suit or a kind of something more subtle than it is to photograph something that's all like one of Gareth's early collections, which is all sort of shapes and points and black plastic and kind of almost photographs itself. For an image maker, that's a treat. So I think fashion photographers, fashion image makers often get drawn towards the more that more sort of flamboyant, because you get better images from it.
As do journalists who want provocation and excitement and the new. So we're all in the same game in that respect.
Sorry.
No, I was going to say, and the viewer, seeing new imagery and seeing new silhouettes and new textures and just new shapes is so much more interesting than endless repetitive clothes.
Oh, we talked, Julie, your exhibition starts in 1980, doesn't it? It's interesting because I'm 54 now and I lived through the 1970s. That's the time I grew up. And there was a lot of different things. The 1970s actually is a very different period from the 1980s onwards. And the two subcultures I was involved in personally, really the main was the skinhead subculture, which I was part of and active part of. And that was a very rigorous dress code. I mean, that was only acceptance by knowing the details. So often subcultures, if you want to look at them that way, are not flamboyant. There are different ways of if you want, identifying other people with a like mind and knowing the codes of that. And I think that you've seen that a lot in things like Lady Gaga, for instance, who identifies a certain sort of young fan by saying, you're disaffected, you don't know what sexuality you are yet, you're having a hard time at school, at home, and everywhere else, you're like me. And I think it's that often subcultures, in the terms of the ones that I was involved in, do. They sort of, they encourage people to think, actually, you don't like the world how it is, become one of us. And then there's strength in numbers. And there's also that sort of recognition that somebody else, just by the way they dress, shares your values. And that's very strong. But I think that changed in the 1980s. I don't think it was the same thing.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting point, because I've been thinking a lot about the relationship between fashion and identity and questioning whether high fashion even does that anymore, whether people see it as something tribal in any way. It doesn't feel to me in the same way that you get your kind of people that only wear a certain look. Maybe that's a good thing, that everyone's a bit more sort of will wear whatever and mix things up a bit, but I feel like we've lost that kind of real sort of parallel between fashion and identity. We talked a lot about this when we were discussing punk over the past few seasons. I don't know, do you notice that at St Martin's, Roger, when you're teaching?
Well, we live in a world of more of a sort of global mashup.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating from a journalistic point of view, because obviously we'd love it if everyone was in neat tribes like they were 30 years ago and we could categorise them all neatly. But just like Gareth, I'm sure, hates being categorised himself, and Alexander McQueen, always really hated that, effort to sort of put him into a box. Mark Jacobs hates it. They all hate it. They want to be put into a box. They love the mash-up culture in which we live, and to a certain extent, we as journalists have to work around that and try not to be overly simplistic. But it's a struggle.
But do you notice it as well with young people? They're less inclined to sort of be, a goth or a punk or a skinhead. Is there more of a focus on the individual? As
I'm not going to speak for all young people at St Martin's. But the journalists are, maybe they're slightly removed, maybe they're slightly detached. There's two types of journalists. There's the kind of journalist who becomes a kind of Isabella Blow kind of character, who becomes part of the fashion system and everything that it is. And then there's the other type who's slightly detached, who's not out there the clubbing, the Susie Menkes, the Sarah Moas, the whatever, and the breed that I'm teaching at St Martin's tend to be more of that detached rather than engaged, and there are pros and cons to that, of course. I think I probably missed out on a lot of the fun, but at the same time maybe it enabled me to observe fashion with this slightly more objective eye, which can help sometimes, and maybe what the end reader wants.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
I hate this with these panels, because people throw out points and they're so interesting, and then I'm like, oh god, we've got so much to talk about, and then I try and make a mental checklist of things to mention again. But one thing I do want to talk about, because I'm eager to look at the show, but I really, really want to talk about the way Gareth presents his fashion and changes to how we're seeing people presenting their fashion. Obviously, because we've got you here, Camilla, it's kind of your area of expertise. And Gareth obviously does a lot of fashion film, which I'm going to ask Nick about in a minute. But have you noticed that people are becoming a lot more open-minded in how they want to display their fashion, display their advertising?
Well, I think they have to, because otherwise it's just, again, so repetitive. And I think to get people to pay attention to what you're doing, you have to do something a bit different. And you know, I think Gareth is such a great example, because he creates such a wonderful mood in his shows, with the music and the lighting and then obviously the clothes, but the hair, the makeup, even down to the nails. Every detail is so considered. And I think that they're such great showpieces, his shows. They're kind of like an art installation.
A lot of people say that we're seeing sort of theatrical presentations declining. You know, they've said that the fashion shows have become a bit sanitized. Would you disagree with that?
No, I actually agree. I actually agree with that. I found the again, so far this season, the New York shows I found so boring. I found it just this kind of painful, monotonous, kind of repetitive series of images, and I think the problem is that everything's becoming so generic, and so I'm really looking for Paris, the Paris shows, to break away from that.
So what are the most sort of creative things that your clients are coming to you with? Is it like, we want to do
nothing?
You're like, give me something interesting to do.
I want some subculture. No, it's all very. No, there's it's more political, the things that I do. They're kind of
so people are taking much less risks.
Yeah, you know, it's within this conversation that's kind of so different, but you know, the things that are inspiring me at the moment, where people are moving away from celebrity culture and actually doing campaigns with a bit of a message, but it's not the kind of wonderful club culture that I'd like it to be right now, but hopefully it will come back into the ads at some point.
Nick, have you noticed that while you've been working, people are taking, maybe it's the financial climate we're in, but are people taking a few less risks? Do you?
I don't know really. I think we're at a super interesting time in general in the presentation of fashion. I think there's an old system which is now clearly defunct and broken, and there's a new system which is starting to form itself. The two don't marry up yet. So you have an interesting case with Gareth, who for a couple of seasons, 2 or 3 seasons in fact, presented a film as opposed to a catwalk show, to actually great success. He worked with filmmaker Ruth Hogben, who I know very well, and I think an awful lot of. And I think his films were a way of showing, actually, this is a way of presenting my collection much more how I want it presented, not just 50 girls walking up and down in a line on the floor. So I think he made a tentative to do that, and I think that got everybody very excited as there being an alternative to the catwalk show. I think it's an interesting time, because we're all going to watch this show live. We'll all see it now, and if we were buying it or wanting to wear it, we'd all desire it from this point. So then you say, okay, well, what's the point in the magazines then? What's their function now? We all, as the public, have seen Gareth Pugh, or would have seen half an hour or so, would have seen Gareth Pugh's collection. So why do we need to see it again in 3 months' time? We've all decided we like it, we've all decided we want to buy it, or don't want to buy it, or whatever it is. So what's their function? I think that's a sort of strange thing. So the designers realise that actually the show is their one moment to say artistically how they feel that season. Then you'd think you'd get actually more exciting shows. You've started to get more televisual shows. So somebody like Marc Jacobs or Prada are showing shows which are now clearly very much for the internet, very much for the camera. I think when Prada first started to live broadcast their shows, they were dreadful broadcasts. You couldn't see what was going on. There's great pools of darkness, you got no idea who was where. But now they've got it off to fine art now. They're very good. Marc Jacobs is very good. Marc Jacobs aiming to do the kind of, what is it, the 5-minute show? You know, they start bang on time.
Like a pop video.
Like a pop video. So they're little bits of entertainment, and that's to get across the message that actually this is what it's about, because it's clear that people are reading less magazines. If you're putting your ads in magazines, and it costs a fortune to do so, and you're not getting through to the same size audience you're getting on the internet, then you have to say, okay, well, where do I best communicate my art? And is it through the show? So I would expect to see the shows becoming more flamboyant rather than less flamboyant. Yes, more slick and professional if you want, so you can see the clothes more on screen, but more of the sort of entertainment that somebody like Alexander McQueen would do. I mean, funny enough, you know, Lee McQueen was the person that, with the show Plato's Atlantis, you know, actually said, well, this is the moment that fashion changes. This is about broadcasting live on the internet my collection, and the front row, incidentally, and here you all are. So he broadcast that to the world. So I think that was one major shift, and I think, you know, you've partly got the fact that the magazines now wonder why they still exist, because they're not there for function anymore. And then you also think from the buyer's point of view, it's not far off, not everybody's doing it yet, but some people are making tentatives and it will happen, that we'll be able to sit here very soon and click to buy. And you will say, oh, well, I love that first outfit, click in the shopping trolley. And that's what will happen very soon. And then you say, okay, well, where does that put the buyers? Because we've heard from designers like J.W. Anderson how frustrating it is that the buyers only represent part of your collection. And if your whole thing this season is to say, okay, I really believe in this, but it's not represented in the press, it's not represented in the buyers, then you're, we'd see designers and fashion art and designers as artists. That's fairly frustrating for an artist to be not, the communication not to be recognised. So I think there is a new system coming along and it will change things. I'm surprised at the moment that Gareth has gone back to this much more conventional way of showing models walking up and down a catwalk, because he made such great films and they became such a moment in terms of communicating fashion. So I think that that's probably largely down to a kind of, probably a slight, a PR or somebody who's from the old school.
Yeah.
Who says actually you have to do it because all the journalists, Sarah Mowers and Susie Menkes, all going to sit in the front row and they're going to write it, so you have to play the system. That Sarah Mowers and Susie Menkes, however lovely they are not the only people who are deciding. So
I thought that the shows would start becoming more of an experience, so for the people who actually attend, to make a difference between, to give them a reason to actually go, because you can see it so well from anywhere in the world. But so I thought we'd start seeing shows where you'd have a kind of exhibition as you walked in, or there'd be some kind of experience that was beyond the actual catwalk show that would turn it into, some spin-offs and, I don't know, interactive something, just something that would make the live experience more detailed.
I think a point Nick makes is so interesting about who is the show for, and I guess this is similar to what you're saying, because we are seeing a rise of brands doing a digital show, but to me it is confusing to think that hundreds of thousands of millions of Gareth's fans will look at this online, but the clothes aren't being shown in their best way. And I wonder if we'll get to a point where we'll have a fashion show, but then every designer will also do something like a special digital show as well, or maybe if they're feeling more exciting, a fashion film. Because
Nick's right. I mean, the fashion show, everyone in the industry seems to agree the fashion show is in crisis. The problem is no one's quite worked out how to replace it or how to make it. I mean, obviously, if you've got amazing resource and you can do a multimedia spectacular and the first fashion shows I saw in Paris were Gautier at his peak, and each one of those was like a theatrical experience, and I'll never forget those. And clearly the shows that will endure and will last will be the shows that go that kind of direction. Everyone knows there are far too many fashion shows. But I've known designers, I won't mention names, but who have taken that risk, who have stepped away from the catwalk, who have gone and done a film or something like that, and quite often they've had to come back, unfortunately, because they've sort of gone off the radar, and we know that half the show is full of people, usually from the sales departments of the magazines, who've got to be there because they have to show willing, therefore to get the advertising, and then there's a lot of students filling up the back seats as well. So are we doing fashion shows in the conventional way just for Susie Menkes? So it's a good debating point.
And Susie Menkes won't say that.
Yeah.
Because the people who would criticise it, who are in a position because they have the space in the magazines or the newspaper to criticise that, are of course the people who are being flown around the world to all the fashion shows. So they're not going to lose their own jobs. You're not going to get Tim Blank, Sarah Moore or Susie Menkes saying, actually I don't want to do this anymore, I'd much rather see it from my desk in New York.
Tim's quite interesting on that though, he's quite pro changes to fashion. But I know what you're saying.
He's still saying you have to be there, which I don't agree with. I've been to a lot of fashion shows, and actually personally the experience of going to a fashion show is deeply unpleasant. It's usually an hour late, you have to wade your way through.
It's getting in.
It's getting in, it's a problem.
It's not just the waiting. I noticed this when we did, sorry Julia.
I was just going to say, I actually do enjoy going to a fashion show.
Yeah, but
I do quite enjoy it.
But Julia,
I cherry pick.
If you went all the time,
if you had to do 15 a day.
I mean, I've had those sort of days where I have done it and thought, how do people do this? Really, because it is exhausting.
Yeah,
and
then
it's just
I don't think you see the clothes that well.
It is exciting, the sort of bustle of it, but
there was one year I did the entire circuit for 2 seasons, and when I say the entire circuit, all 4 cities, but also couture and also the cities for menswear as well. Wow. And I spent probably a month in the same hotel in Paris, and I probably spent you know, 90% of their time waiting for shows.
Yeah.
And the actual, you know, trying to get 5 or 6 shows in a day is an exhausting process. It's also boring as well. It can put you off fashion, but obviously once the show starts, you enjoy the experience, of course.
I want to go back to this idea of people doing more theatrical shows, because I think that's quite interesting, and a few of you kind of mentioned that as maybe a way forward. But again, I'm kind of unsure of, maybe not the point of that, but that Vuitton show that we saw that was absolutely beautiful that Ruth, actually, you mentioned Ruth Ogden before, Ruth had done films for it that were kind of behind, it was the one that was like a hotel, they were behind bedroom doors, it was really beautiful. But the viewer watching the stream couldn't see couldn't see the films, and a part of me thinks, okay, maybe they're doing what you said, you know, a little sneak peek extra thing for the people that are there. But then sometimes you think, well, the more theatrical shows, that still gets lost in the camera. You know, often with the live stream, you don't see everything that's going on.
But then doesn't it bring it back to the actual live experience, which is kind of needed? Picking up on the point that you both made, which I totally agree with, that the show is like, the format is a little bit old school and we need to kind of progress from that. But it's not just the shows, it's the whole system of presentation through to buying that has got lost, and it's all to what Nick said about the fact that everyone can see it so soon, so you don't need the editors to actually edit things and show you how to wear stuff and show you the trends. You know what you want to wear before it's even being made or even been ordered, because you've seen it so soon. So what's the answer to it?
The answer surely is just fewer shows. You know, I mean, not every label needs to do a show, and you know, everyone will be happy in that kind of way.
But doesn't this go back to what Nick was saying about, you know, Gareth doing those amazing films, and then you pointed out very aptly that means people stop writing about stuff. If people stop doing a show, they do drop off the radar, because people have this weird thing, well, I only write about it if I saw it, you know.
Well, in the end, the sheer volume of designers who just simply won't be able to show will encourage a more serious analysis of the use of fashion film as being pioneered here at Show Studio, but we'll see that really being analysed and reviewed. Why not? Why shouldn't fashion films be reviewed just as much as shows? And it hasn't happened yet, has it?
No, and fashion photography was never reviewed. Fashion lives in this kind of weird, non-criticised thing. I mean, part of the reason we're doing these panels is to say, well, just like sport's very good at articulating itself to its audience, to an audience, to the public. But fashion's actually very bad at doing that. It speaks to itself. Fashion addresses its own industry. It doesn't step beyond that. What I always thought was very sad is that there's so many incredible things that are worth talking about with fashion at lots of different levels, and yet people don't talk about them in an excited, interested way. It's always sort of slightly as if, oh, we all know that, so we're not going to mention it. And the reason that I really wanted to do these panels was because I sat next to John Galliano, and we were waiting for hair and makeup to be done on one shoot, and he sat next to me. He said, I'll show you the video of my show. And he showed me the video and narrated it to me. So, okay, this is from the influence was this, and I cut this dress because of that, and it's because of that. And I had a whole sort of talking about, and it was fascinating. You sit next to any expert of any field who are excited and able to communicate, and then all of a sudden you're engrossed, whether it's golf or whether it's cookery or whether it's natural history or whatever it is we've all seen on television, but yet singularly fashion has never chosen to make that step to the public. It only speaks to itself. And therefore there was, sorry, Luke. There was
That's an exciting idea, though, to get the designers to come in here after the show.
We do that, reviews.
You've done that.
Yeah, we have. We're Show Studio, always one step ahead.
But fashion photography never got criticised. I would do a campaign for somebody like Dior or for Alexander McQueen that would go out in every possible space in the world, on backs of buses, on backs of magazines, everywhere, and yet nobody mentioned it. And it's like, well, actually, I've put a lot of my heart and soul into this. Alexander McQueen's got lots of things he wants to say. You know, there's certainly communication going on here, but nobody criticises it. Nobody mentions it. Nobody took it apart intellectually. So you look at the broadsheets, and they wouldn't know what to say about it. They just have no language to criticise fashion photography.
Do you think it holds the medium back?
Yes, I think any artistic medium without a critical forum is definitely held back.
Totally agree.
So I don't want to sit here and criticise anybody's work, because it's not nice criticising people, but they need it. Fashion designers, like any artist, need a critical forum. They need somebody to say, actually, that's not very good, that's very derivative. Actually, they need that critical forum. They might dislike it or disagree with it, like all artists do, critics, but they do need it, and fashion distinctly needs a critical forum.
It also acts as kind of a quality control, and it helps people kind of progress, and it helps the industry progress, which the fashion industry, especially advertising and photography, really needs at the moment. Everyone's kind of stuck in a rut, same photographers, same hair, makeup thing. It's
weird how long they last, isn't it? Year in, year out.
Again, don't want to criticise any of my clients.
Well, it's the same people doing it when I started 30 years ago.
Absolutely.
Whenever I started, ages ago I started, it's the same fashion photographers. They're still there.
To try for a young photographer breaking through now, I just
really hard.
It's so hard.
But they're not. That's the thing. There aren't young photographers breaking through now. They're going into fashion film.
Yeah.
That's where the
they're
sort
doing
of zeitgeisty moment.
Versions of one of the kind of big names to become the kind of the cheaper version. That's what I find.
That never gets anybody anywhere.
I'd like to talk a little bit about public interest in fashion, and then we will go to the show, but I am loving this discussion because Nick, you mentioned, fashion speaks to itself, and one thing that, especially now we've got Julia here, I'd like to talk a little bit about the exhibition, because it seems to me like that's the only area of fashion that people have cottoned on to how interested people are. So obviously Savage Beauty was a really great example of that with the Met, and that really showed how interested people are in fashion, but it doesn't feel like maybe magazines and a significant number of websites that talk about fashion have caught up with that. There still seems to be this kind of us and them divide. Do you think the exhibition is kind of brilliant for, have you noticed that public enthusiasm for fashion?
I wanted to put fashion in because I felt that was part of a creative process, along with art and architecture and all these things that people experiment with, and I thought that the message was as important as every other discipline there. And I know a lot of fashion designers do have experimental moments, and people don't often get to see those items, only maybe on a photo shoot, but they wouldn't actually, be able to sort of experience sort of how fantastic those things look in real life, and appreciate the work that goes into and the artistry that goes into some of the fashion designers' ideas through time as well. And there was a shop called the House of Beauty and Culture, which Christopher Nemeth worked in with as part of the team with Judy Blaine and Alan MacDonald and John Moore, and his craft and artistry in piecing together items of clothing was really fascinating. So like to have fashion sort of almost in a sort of like a gallery space I think it works really well, and it makes everything sort of tie in and makes fashion not this thing that's sort of presented just on a catwalk.
But if everyone's kind of understanding how amazing fashion is in the exhibition space, and we can see that there's this popular thirst for it, and I don't know if anyone will have the answer to this, why aren't we seeing fashion presented in all its glory on TV or on the radio? If it is such a thing that is kind of exciting people on a popular scale, as it clearly is if you look at the viewer figures for Savage Beauty or even the punk exhibition that just happened at the Met. Why aren't we seeing fashion talked about properly on TV or the radio?
I spent quite a lot of time actually meeting with TV production companies, trying to get some kind of television content out there that I find interesting, and every single time all they wanted was to have access to photo shoots I was doing and which celebrities were going to be there. That's all everyone responded, and it was just so exhausting. Not one single channel cared.
So British media they just scandalise it. Scandalise and trivialise is how the British media have treated fashion. They sort of, so all the models are bulimic and take drugs, or let's show you how to put on your makeup. It's either one or the other, because that's what they think the viewer figures that's how they get the best viewer figures. And television wants huge viewer figures, like magazines, newspapers want huge circulations. So that's what they go for. What's going to give them most? That's part of the reason that Kate Moss is incredibly popular. Kate Moss, who's in an auction at Christie's tonight. This image is so I'm working.
I've tried it with TV producers as well. I've often said, why isn't there a sort of evening BBC Two kind of serious regular program about fashion? Why isn't? And they always say the figures. They always go to the viewing figures. They say it just won't work. I don't believe them, actually.
No. I don't believe them.
They say unless we put Kate Moss in there, it's not going to work, and they refuse to accept what, in fact, the major museums and galleries of the world are accepting big time, which is that fashion is a massive crowd puller.
And not even fashion in a celebrity context. If you look at Savage Beauty, that was one designer. It's the same as if you look at Club to Catwalk at the V&A. These aren't popular fashion, you know, these are difficult subjects. Like McQueen is a difficult designer, and the fact that that drew so many people, it does suggest a certain level of intelligence that isn't being respected, it seems to me, by radio producers or TV producers.
But then who's going to present it?
Obviously me.
Obviously you.
This is a
we're hoping to hold on to you for another season.
Yeah, this is just me applying for a job. That was
I'm sure you'll get one as well. You're very good.
Thanks, Nick.
It's been going on for a long time. You know, in the Late Show and various efforts on BBC Two, usually there have been various efforts. There have been occasional documentaries on Channel 4. But there's been nothing consistent and regular. I mean, partly, I suppose fashion, you know, it's not like, you know, 12 months throughout the year that you could sustain it in. You know, it would be wonderful to see TV doing sort of like serious programs during the fashion season, the show season, just like you're doing here. You know, that would be great. That would be really brave. I don't know why we haven't seen it on some of the newer channels.
It's a peculiar beast, fashion. A lot of people, especially intellectual people who are academic in their approach to life, don't understand it. And certainly in the culture we live in, which is largely a Protestant-based culture, fashion is seen as a sin. It's seen as vain, it's seen as shallow, all those things which are not, you know, if I said I spent an hour this morning, I didn't, but if I said I spent an hour this morning getting dressed, that's a bit long, you know, you should know. Actually, what's wrong with that? That one cares about how one looks.
Well, there was a true hate piece about fashion in the Times this week, which has been a major talking point, written by Giles Corran on Saturday, which is the most viciously anti-fashion piece I think I've ever read in my life. And Laura Craig, the fashion editor of the Times, quite neatly and cleverly responded to it in the Times this morning, just by suggesting he had anger management problems without referring to him directly. But what Nick is saying is right. Yes, there is a kind of almost loathing from people who really have no understanding of what the world of fashion is about. It's intensely irritating.
What is that, because fashion's seen as vain? Have you all noticed that working in fashion, that people see it as something that's trivial and vain? And
it's highly criticised, and I agree. As soon as you're seen as spending money on clothes, yes, that's definitely.
But why isn't people angry about people spending money on architecture or cars?
Or art.
It's not recognised as an art form yet. It will be. What I don't understand, it's possibly, hello Neil, it's possibly the most single, it's the most basic form of self-expression. We're all dressing because we're all saying something about ourselves through how we dress. And it's the most accessible form of self-expression. So it's the most democratic art form we have. It's been ever since there's been human culture, there has been a desire to show who one is through a body adornment or what you wear or whatever it is. And so why it's been demonized as something that's so trivial and so sort of as a sin, I really don't understand. But I think it is largely to do with, certainly in Europe, to do with a Protestant-based culture. If you look at Catholic countries that are predominantly Catholic in their culture, like Spain or Italy or France, it's much less sad. If you look at America or Britain, it seems to be much more that.
But it's also an angry macho male thing that they just don't get it at all. Can't even get to really hint it. But what you've just said about this idea of fashion as the most democratic form of self-expression, exactly what I think. I completely agree.
Can I just ask a question? But surely, if you wear the most plainest clothes, whatever, not particularly statement making, as in like a catwalk show would be, but just the act of dressing, isn't that wearing some sort of style or fashion?
Communicating something.
I mean, just the t-shirt is a fashion statement on its own.
But I'm interested.
Somebody's got to design it. Somebody's got to design the plainest trousers ever.
But do you think people are conscious of how they dress? Because I was walking around Soho with a friend who's a young designer, and he was looking at what people were wearing. And he said, what I find sad is it doesn't feel like there's any choice in what they're wearing. It's not that they want to wear a shirt and chinos. They're not doing it because they don't want to dress flamboyantly. He was like, there's no conscious element to it. He was like, they're just wearing clothes because they can't be naked. But if they could be naked, they wouldn't anyway, because they're not exciting enough to do that. And I thought it was really interesting coming from someone who's so young and so passionate about fashion. And I thought it was quite an interesting point. How have we just completely? Is there any popular notion of getting dressed to express yourself?
Of course, but you don't have to. You don't have to be conscious of it every single day. I mean, there are long periods of time in the summer holidays when I'm in flip-flops and shorts and not thinking about fashion or how I look at all. The idea that you're doing it intensely day after day is for those who are true obsessives. But you know, there are plenty of people who will dip in and out of it and have periods when they're very interested in it, will dress up for a special event. You know, it's not necessarily about, you know, the great thing about fashion is you don't have to be fashion 24 hours a day. Most people aren't fashion when they get into their home.
And nobody dresses at random. You just don't walk into your wardrobe or your closet and just put on clothes without looking at them. Very few people do that. So everybody makes an elective choice of what they're going to wear, whether they're going to wear certain things. My father would always say, my father was a lovely man, but very dressed not to be noticed. So he'd always dress down. His thing was, well, a gentleman never dresses to be noticed. That was his sort of thing. And also he didn't like spending any money on clothes and all that sort of. My mother was completely opposite, which had put me in the sort of mess I'm in. But anyway,
bit of a therapy session.
I like that public airing of my problems. But there is that sort of, you know, even electing not to dress in a certain way is sort of saying, well, I tried to put my father in jeans, he would have, you know, had a blue fit. I mean, he could have absolutely not gone in them. So there is a sort of, well, within these parameters, I'm saying who I am. I'm just not, you know, I'm not engaging in other forms of dress code, because I know that these are values that reinforce who I am as a person. My father was an intellectual man, and he wanted to, you know, be seen as that.
I find that British young women aren't conscious of what they are saying through what they wear. I think they're making choices of outfits based on peer pressure or whatever other people are wearing at school, or what celebrity they like and what they're wearing, and they don't actually realise what they personally are communicating to the people around them.
Do you think that's because there's a pressure to sort of dress in a sexual way? You know,
I think, yeah, for young women, sexual, and also I think the whole celebrity culture. I think magazines, these celebrity-driven magazines, they have this kind of code of, unless you have this type of handbag, you're not going to be happy. You're not going to have the man of your dreams. There's just that slight kind of message in them, which I think
is
a real
completely
shame.
removed from that self-expression element. It's
Absolutely.
like you need to dress to fit in rather than you dress to. Yeah. Julia, tell us how you get dressed, because you look amazing. I want to know how, when you wake up each morning, how do you get dressed?
I just sort of sling things together, really. I mean, I just, it's like a second nature to me. I don't really...
So you don't decide on a character or anything like that?
No. I'm just myself, and then you know, as I go around, I see things I sort of like, wherever that may be. You know, it could be a charity shop, or it could be something a friend's made. You know, yeah. I've had moments where I sort of plan things and consider things, and spend more time doing that. But I think everyone's different. I think it's just something that I've never really grown out of, and continually fascinates me, and I just love the things that people that I know are making and doing, and I'm like a super fan of fashion, really, and style, and I'm very into personal style as well. You know, I think that's really important, and feeling comfortable in what you wear. I mean, I do feel comfortable, and I don't feel very comfortable walking around in, say, flip-flops, perhaps, which I consider a health hazard, I'm afraid. But, you know, like each one to their own, you know.
You're getting style lessons.
Sorry. You know, and I appreciate, you know, my mother dresses for function. Her idea is to, you know, it's got to have an elasticated waist, and it's got to be comfortable, and it's functional. And I understand that as well, and I enjoy that sort of clothing as well. You know, I go to the gym and do yoga, so I am in my yoga outfit on occasion.
I would love to see
that.
That's all I can think
There's
about.
one time I mentioned to go to the show, but there's one, because we've been looking at punk on Show Studio because of the Met for the last year or so now. There is, at that time, you look back at some of the people who formed punk right at the beginning of it. You've got someone like Jordan, who was dressing in fetish wear and catching the train from Brighton to London.
All our younger viewers are going to think you're talking about Katie Price.
Not that Jordan, sorry. Jordan, who used to be at the shop Sex or Seditionaries. She would dress in fetish wear and catch a train with all the commuters, all the really straight guys, right up to London, and walk from one end of the King's Road to the other, which is her kind of catwalk. And the way some of those first punks dress was so offensive to people, and people found it so outrageous. I remember driving down the A1 and at Hendon you turn into London and there was a punk standing at the bus stop and people were this was back in 1977, people were literally winding down the windows and shouting abuse at him and throwing things at him and just generally kind of abusing him just as they were going by in their cars. So much did he stand out. Now that's what I wonder if there's anything like that left anymore in our society.
This is interesting. The same young designer that I was walking around with on Saturday, he's providing a lot of fuel for this discussion, but he was wearing kind of like shorts, but they had like a skirt, like culottes. They had a skirt panel at the front. And we were in Soho and he got shouted at twice. We were going, why are you wearing a skirt, mate? Just guys. And it's the only time I've ever in my entire life been with someone and someone's commented on their clothes. I thought people had seen everything. No one's shocked anymore. I found it really weird, really, really unsettling.
And also we're in London. I mean, my guess is in the provinces it's much more marked.
Yeah.
But even then, as you say, it was a minority, a small minority, and if it happened now, it's never going to be the majority.
But twice in the space of like an hour, it was really bizarre. It made me, because we did a punk panel discussion here, and we got Stephen Jones, Simon Foxton, Judy Blame, Ian R. Webb, and Alex Fury, and one of the biggest things that came out of that discussion was this idea that one of the reasons fashion's become less about personal expression and fashion's become less innovative, perhaps, is because of the internet and nothing feels new. There's this sense that everyone has seen everything. No one's shockable or flappable anymore. And I really agreed with that, and I think that is a thing that a lot of young designers struggle with. It's so much harder to make a splash because people are so sort of overwhelmed by images, and part of that I thought was, you're just so used to seeing people look great or bizarre, whatever you want to call it, on the street. No one is shocked by someone dressing in a punkish way. No one's shocked by people having colourful hair or tattoos or piercings. And I really believe
it's a
that.
positive reaction if
someone
comments,
people are intrigued. So I was so shocked because I completely subscribed to that view, and then to be in the street and be with someone who was wearing like trainers, a jumper, and then a skirtish pair of shorts, and to get shouted at twice, I found that so. It really made me question stuff.
I think fashion can still be powerful, can still shock and still amaze, and it's actually the designer whose clothes we're about to look at who is the kind of designer who we want. We want to bring back that kind of spirit. I mean, everyone who lived through punk, would love to see that kind of energy re-emerge, and occasionally we have flashes of it. But you're right that it is much harder to shock in the way that punk came into a deeply conventional society of the late 70s.
And shocked a lot more. I mean, some of my favourite photographs from punk are the pictures of the actual punks on King's Road. And there's 3 that we've got in the exhibition downstairs. And in each one of them, all 3 of them are couples. And each one of the couples, 2 of 2 girls, I think, and one's of a boy and a girl. And they have one of them has a partner on a lead. So a choker and a lead. And nobody at the Met, the gala night and Met, came on a lead, which is a great shame, I think. But yet that was 40 years ago. Have we got more conservative, more accepting, or are we more politically correct than we were then?
I think people have codes of what's shocking now. Sorry, I'm stepping out of chairperson and going into panelist mode. But I think, there's codes of what's shocking that people do. So someone like Miley Cyrus thinks she's being shocking, but she's doing very conventional things. So I feel like there's just more established ideas of what's shocking. In the same way people take the codes of punk, like it's quite simplistic, safety pins and studs. People also take the codes of what's shocking, so a slogan t-shirt, lots of flesh.
It's also what type of person we're talking about, though. That picture was a couple of kids on the street, right? Whereas the people going to the Met, they've got something else to prove. They're going there to be seen. It's a slightly different kind of motivation for dressing.
Maybe it's about where we see them now as well. Maybe it's not. This goes back to the club culture thing that we were talking about. Maybe you don't see it on the street or in the clubs, you see it online. So you see it in people like Courtney Stodden, who you shot the other day, or weird kids on Tumblr.
I mean, one of the big problems at the moment is just the sheer speed at which we chew up something. But if a new trend or craze or aggressive counter movement emerged, the idea that the press are onto it within days, it's analysed and pushed aside within 3 weeks, and then we're on to the next one. So therefore, I mean, designers have the same problem. The designers I speak to always talk about the relentless pressure to try and be new, when actually what they want to do is work through an idea. They want to work through it over years, just like artists always historically have done, haven't they? It's not. It's impossible to come up with some brilliant new idea every week or every season or whatever. So the idea of continuity, but still retaining a kind of aggression and kind of countercultural feel, is very, very difficult. It'll be very interesting to see whether we feel Gareth Pugh is actually doing that.
Should we have a look? That's a nice little introduction to the show.
I'm helping you, Lou.
Yeah, thank you.
Double cheer, people.
I know, it's brilliant. So here we go, Gareth Pugh, Spring Summer 14. Let's see a few looks so we can settle into it. That opening look is absolutely amazing though.
But it's not black.
I know.
Well, we're into colour, which is exciting
Yeah.
to see.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the Gareth Pugh fans and not so enthusiastic followers of his work have been wondering at what stage he'll bring colour in a big way. And of course, we hope he doesn't. He's not going to go multicolour overnight. But there's that little hint that in the last 2-3 seasons he's picked one other colour other than black, white, or grey.
I'm quite surprised at how simple the set is, and the lighting is quite kind of clear, and it's not kind of creating a mood like he normally does.
But maybe that goes to, you know, that his hair and makeup is always so... I'm interested...
The makeup looks stunning.
Yeah, the makeup does look
Is it
absolutely
Alex
amazing.
Watts?
Yeah, he always works with Alex. I presume it's Alex. Probably won't be this one season where I'm like, it's Alex.
Well, perhaps it's a sign of confidence. Perhaps he knows that the look, the clothes, everything is right, and there's a sort of a real maturity about this, and therefore he feels he can strip away anything that might detract from the actual model.
We all talked about how much we loved sort of the angular stuff he did, and you know, Julie, you mentioned wearing that amazing creation, and he has been doing this slightly more fluid aesthetic for a while now, and I think it's been really pleasant to watch, and it's really showed off his cutting skills and his skills as a designer. Are you guys happy to see him do something more fluid and, to use a very simplistic term, like feminine, traditionally feminine?
I think it's a bit of a shame that, you know, that there was an energy and a funness to his earlier shows that one misses a little bit, but it's so beautiful. The cuts and the shapes are still exquisite, so it's just gone into something else, hasn't it?
You would probably argue that, you know, I mean, he usually talks about contrasts in his work, and that it hasn't gone all fluid. He's introduced that element in there, but it's always as a counterpoint to his more predictable kind of approach, and that contrast is exciting. I mean, this is a great collection. I think this is a very important collection for him. It looks super sophisticated.
Nick, what's your thoughts on what you've seen?
Well, I've only seen four images so far, so I'd like to see the whole collection before I make a sort of general statement about it. One has to wonder whether Gareth is either getting pressure to become more commercially viable or desiring to become more commercially viable because it would give him bigger options. Is Gareth looking for, you know, a position at Saint Laurent or Dior or Givenchy, or, you know, what's he hoping to get, or is he just looking for investment into his own line? And of course it has to work as a business. So it's a tricky thing, but I mean, all artists tread it. You know, the idea of commerciality and you know,
But he treads it quite well.
Well, he's 7-8 years in now. I mean, he has to at some stage earn money.
Yeah.
You know, he can't be the artist and the Garrett for his entire career. I mean, I think what we're looking at is really beautiful, actually.
Yeah.
I think just before we came in here, I was in Harvey Nichols and I actually went and looked at Gareth Pugh in the menswear department there and thought, yes, I could wear that. That's about the first time I've said that. And
no flip-flops then.
so no, I wouldn't. I would not be wearing it with flip-flops. I promise you that. But I was excited. I thought, well, you know, I always remember once sort of talking to Dick Bickenbode's Belgian designer from the early wave at the Antwerp 6, and he was saying, you know, that I tried to do something completely different every season. I tried to shock every season. I thought, I can't do this for my entire life and my entire career. At some stage I've got to create the continuity, create the pieces in there that will actually sell as well. And is that selling out?
So
no,
is this about confidence rather than commerciality then? He's saying, you know, he knows he's made his name, he knows he's had this huge effect on fashion, but now, yeah, he's showing his confidence as a designer rather than a showman.
Well, maybe he's thinking I can make my more aggressive statements through fashion film with Nick, and less so on the runway. Maybe he's thinking like that.
He does do a lot of collaborations. He did some amazing, I talk about this constantly because it was the best thing I've ever seen, but he did the costumes for the Wayne McGregor ballet that was absolutely incredible, and it was really angular, you know, really old school Gareth. It was absolutely incredible. Julia, what are your thoughts on what we've seen?
It's very chic, but what I must say is even in Gareth's early collections, the underpinnings were always very wearable.
Yeah.
You know, there was always the gorgeous silk vesty, t-shirty, leggings. There was always those things that actually because he maybe put something outrageous on the top for the catwalk, but the actual foundations of Gareth's clothes have always been really wearable and very chic and very well finished, and I think that's what you can see with this collection. And also I love these shapes. I haven't seen one of his shows for a while, so I'm not sure if these are new shapes or something, the silhouette that he's been doing for a while, but I love these sort of
the curves feels different,
puff curve
It's a different
coming
shape.
up. It's fabulous, fabulous.
And I like that
it's
it
very
hints
chic.
at what we know about him. You know, it hints at this idea of completely sort of playing with the body, but without
Look,
doing
I can see you in that.
shopping
Gorgeous.
now. I'll put in a personal order.
Yeah.
Next panel.
I totally agree with what you've just said. It's one of the things I actually have really liked about his shows in the past, is that you can, you know, I've got a commercial head on me, so it's like that's something that I always like seeing, and that someone who can successfully put commercial elements in a show that is full of so much creativity, I find fantastic.
Because I think commerciality is exciting in fashion as well. I don't think it's just creativity that's exciting. I think there's something, I think that's why actually everyone's so excited about someone like J.W. Anderson. What they're excited about is the aggression and the speed and the determination with which he's building his business, and they're as excited about that as they are with the clothes, and often they're excited by the statement his collection's putting out there, both because they know it's such a sort of commercial thing, and I find that quite interesting.
Well, you can't ignore the commercial kind of game, so to speak, that goes on.
Well, look, you know, he's saying, hey, I'm in Paris now. I'm at the heart of it.
That's
I'm
very
appealing
ladylike.
to an international audience, and, you know, I could put all these models in masks on, but I don't need to do that anymore. You know?
Can we go back to that look before, Neil? Because that was with Lindsay. Because that's very Mugler-esque to me. You know, those amazing Angel advert. It just reminds me of that. It's so beautiful. This feels very different to what we saw from him last season as well, and I like that there's a definite progression.
There's a lot of Rick in there, isn't there?
Yeah, I really want to ask this actually
I'd love
about
to know the influence that he has.
Well, yeah, about more established designers championing younger designers. So obviously a great example is Ray Kawakubo and Junya, but also the way Rick Owens really sort of picked up on Gareth. Would we like to see more of that kind of fashion people holding out their hands and helping other young designers? Because we obviously in London we have amazing initiatives like Fashion East, but I think this relationship between more established designer and younger designer is really interesting.
Yeah.
Because you do that a lot, obviously, Nick, with you know, your assistants who go on to become photographers, but it doesn't seem to me like designers do that in the same way. You know,
I think they're all struggling here.
I don't know, but we don't trace the lineage so well. I mean, which designers or which image makers were at different studios. You're not quite sure where they've come from. How many people that work with Alexander McQueen? There's a fantastic chap who did Michel Androva, who was at Lee McQueen for a while. You do see these designers that pop up. They've gone to the sort of school of, if you want, so in the same way.
There seems to be such a focus now, maybe actually Roger can shed some light on this, on if you want to do something under your own name, you have to do it as soon as you leave college. Because I do agree with you, obviously there's amazing designers who've worked in studios, but it seems that thing where it's like you have to make that decision as soon as you leave college, either I'm going to set up on my own or I'm going to go to a studio.
Well, you've got to have incredible energy and commitment, and, you know, you've got to be very young and willing to...
Hungry for
it. You've got to be hungry. That hunger can
you've got to want it
quickly.
bad.
But wouldn't it be better
if you don't do it fast within 2-3 years, you've got a job at big New York studio or whatever. But
that's so different if you think in image making, like people assist and it's the same with journalism. You intern, you work in a junior position, you work your way up. Like, it's very rare that someone goes, I'm going to found my own magazine.
Not everybody assists, Lou. I didn't assist.
That's true.
I don't think that's the only way into fashion image making, to assist. I mean, Lee McQueen, as we all acknowledge, is one of the greatest designers. He went and spent time, at other people's studios. He was on Savile Row for a while. He was in sorry, my memory of names is awful, but he was an Italian designer for a while.
He worked at Angels, like the costume.
So yeah, there is this sort of precedent of designers assisting in helping different studios. So I'm not sure it's that different.
At St Martin's, the MA, a lot of those students have had substantial experience and may have worked professionally beforehand.
That's true,
and they see it as a springboard, and they're not coming out at 22. You know, they may be 28, 29, or even in their 30s.
The whole interning program is sort of a way of assisting, if you want. I mean, it's sort of, I know people who work with Gareth, and there's a sort of intern program that goes on there. We have one here, and people come here and they commit to us for whatever it is, 3 months or so, and they hopefully learn something from us, and we get something from working with them. So I think that's some form of apprenticeship or assisting, or there seems to be exchange there.
I think it's good that we all talk about how important that is, because there does seem to be, I remember when we interviewed Lulu Kennedy here, there does seem to be this, some people seem to be worried about people expecting to go into fashion and become famous straight away, you know, go to college, do a BA, do an MA, leave at 22, set up their own label. So it's great to hear a set of very successful people talk about the
Can we
value.
go back to the last looks? That was beautiful.
It was stunning.
Yeah,
It was
lovely.
stunning.
It sort of wafted by as we were all slightly overcome by its beauty.
I mean, it's clean, it's modern. I mean, the photos are just so sharp, aren't they? I mean, the whole look is fantastic. I think he's really done us a treat here.
That's one I'd love to see in real life.
I'd like to see it move.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing, that we get this sort of static vision. And over history of fashion photography is always my point. The designer's visions can be compromised by being expressed as a still image, whereas no designer creates a garment to be seen as a still image. So it's always compromised, and we have a compromise here. I'd love to see how that moves.
Yes.
I'd love to hear how it moves.
Yeah, and technically, it would be interesting to know more about the fabrics, because he's very innovative with the fabrics, and there's a lot to explore there and find out about. But it's a very strong show. I mean, I think this is a really mature collection.
What struck you about that look in particular, Nick?
There's just an overall poetry to it, which I was immediately drawn to just on a natural human level, and sort of, you know, one responds to things automatically without having to intellectualize them. But also because, you know, I'm thinking how that would photograph and how that would work and what it inspires in you. You look at something like that and it, you know, will suggest certain poetic notions to you. You know, whatever they might be, of ice cream or the sea or, you know, whatever it is, but things that make you feel sort of happy. And that's essentially what I'm asked to do in my career. My job is to look at a garment like that and then respond to it poetically or emotionally, and to try and express my feelings for that garment, not to show the garment, but to express my feelings for it. That's what I'm asked to do, and that's what hopefully a good image maker of any sort will do. We're not recording machines, we're there to express ourselves, and that's what the better ones do. So it just made me feel uplifted, I think.
So it feels like there's a life to it. You want to take it somewhere and do something, make a story around it.
Yes, if that walked out of the changing room in front of my camera, I would feel that I had most of the story done for me already. And that's actually the thing about fashion film, is the narrative that's in conventional film is actually in the piece of clothing. Those garments already have their own narrative. So trying to impose a narrative on top of that isn't a good thing. So that's why I always argue that fashion film really shouldn't be a narrative-based film medium.
The shoulders are sensational on that, and the colours are wonderful, and it's a beautiful, soft turquoise, stunning, really great.
The relationship between the corset and the skirt is also...
It's great, isn't it?
Yeah. But sorry Neil, just to go back, but this is what we mean about still imagery, and why I'd love to see that in a fashion film, because you think we're so lucky actually that her hand, they shot her just in that position, so you can see the curve of the corset. Because if you think of the photographer had snapped his lens,
and also the way her legs are positioned, because you can see, you can almost feel the movement in the skirt, and if you miss that, that would be a real shame.
Yeah.
But also it's down to the model. We're talking a lot about the clothes, a lot about the photography here, but this is a person we're looking at who is incredibly good at making those clothes look incredibly good. So the model shouldn't be sort of just written out of this equation. And we saw on the Moschino show on Saturday night, was it?
Yeah, Saturday night was the best night of my life.
Just how models can really bring those clothes to life. I mean, it was old school modelling back from sort of Pat Cleveland days of the sort of early 1980s, late 1970s. But the models actually showed the clothes in a much more sort of emotional, demonstrative way. Whereas we've fallen into this way that models are less allowed to do that.
They're not human, they just kind of clothes.
Well, I think they're all human, but they're not encouraged to express their own personal feeling of it, which I think was very different if you go back to the 70s and the modelling of the 70s. But then again, it was a sort of new time for fashion shows in general. They hadn't been around that long in that form.
There's amazing footage at the V&A's Club to Catwalk exhibition of some of those older fashion shows, and it was quite sad looking at it actually, because the models seem so excited and inspired by what they're wearing, and I'm sure these girls are so excited and inspired by what they're wearing, but it's not.
The problem is most of these girls they're on their kind of 40th show of the season.
Yeah, so they're not that excited to inspire about anything.
Wants to go home.
It's surviving it. It's kind of normal.
I love the softness and the simplicity of a shape like that feel, given some of Gareth's structures, you know, how you have to kind of climb into them and be put into them, how personal that fastening is. That seems really fresh to me.
It's a real shame we're not seeing these in movement.
Yeah, we need to have a fashion film.
Tell by that skirt that would move beautifully.
Yeah.
You're going to be on the phone to Gareth as soon as this finishes, Nick.
I am, actually.
Oh wow.
what I really like about this show is it's kind of effortless, and it's not trying too hard. You know, it's so like the cuts in the shoulders that he's got. It's a kind of a simple idea, really, but it just changes the whole dynamic of proportions and things like that. So it does do those things, questions things, but it does it in a very sort of natural and effortless fashion, and it just looks really chic, actually.
And going back to
nice.
what we said right at the beginning of whether the maturity is coming through confidence or maybe potential kind of pressure or a kind of a career path, it does feel, as we see more of the show, it does feel like it's confidence, and which I'm really happy to see, because within the confidence, obviously there could be a kind of he's got an idea of his future in his head, but it really feels like confidence.
Because I feel like I love that you said effortless, because I don't think any of us, and this is not a criticism towards Gareth at all, but none of us would say effortless when thinking of Gareth Pugh, you know, because there's so much to it.
Yeah.
And to see him do effortless, I actually find that really new. And
you know that's a complicated pattern.
Yeah.
And there's some complicated draping going on, and you know that it's very considered, but the end result is something that just flows naturally and adorns the body in a very sort of natural kind of way. It's very clever.
Yeah, and that feels very, it's clever, it's not simple in any way.
No,
I'm not
by saying it's effortless, I'm not saying it's simple at all.
It's interesting, the softening of the vision and the softening of the emphasis, and it'd be interesting to explore how many designers who started off with hard, angular, uncompromising kind of starts have as they've grown older, sought to soften or slightly, in traditional quote marks, feminize the vision. I mean, you think of maybe Alexander McQueen and then Sarah Burton taking it off and softening it, or even in some of the commercial work I do with Boss Woman, which just came out of the Hugo Boss menswear tradition and was tailoring for women, and they've just spent season after season trying to soften it without obviously losing the tailoring, and that's quite a challenge, because you don't want him to suddenly Gareth Pugh to suddenly start doing sweet dresses every season. That'd be a disaster. So, but it is a kind of a recognition that if you want to broaden your market and your woman customer, that you can't stick entirely down one furrow. But
this woman is still powerful, isn't she?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there are different conversations with Gareth. I mean, one hopes he never, he doesn't want to repeat himself. And he wants to talk in a different way at different times, very different from last season's. The message is very different. So I think you're looking at an intelligent man who's expressing himself on a whole range of different issues. I don't think there's one
like a
continual,
linear
sort of softening of his image. I mean, that might happen, but I think it really depends where he's going and what he wants to achieve.
I love that idea of lots of conversations, because I think that's something that designers aren't really allowed to do. There is this pressure to go in a line, and the example you gave earlier, Roger, feeling like you have to better yourself and do something new every season, and someone as smart as Gareth, you do want to see, as you said in a really lovely way, you do want to see him talk in lots of different languages. Like, why shouldn't he? Why does he have to go in
you have to go in a line to a certain extent with the buyers, but that doesn't necessarily have to be in the show, of course, because the buyers have done the buying before the show's even happened usually anyway. So the show should enable you to follow your heart in that respect. But within the commercial line, then you have to have that continuity and return to what people like and the buyers like primarily.
And Roger, could you tell me this? In a collection like this is what, 40 pieces, something like that?
Yeah, I think it's
38. How
38.
many pieces will be made?
Well, that's a good question.
What's the editing process it goes to get those 40 pieces on the catwalk?
Well, there are shows that are out there when nothing ever gets made, you know, and it is.
No, sorry, I meant made to go on a catwalk. So I remember when I worked with Lee McQueen, he would make, say, I don't know what it was, 80 pieces and show 40. So there's half the collection doesn't get shown.
Well, that's going to be about commercial, what kind of budget you've got, and I don't know much about Gareth's financial position
or how
at the
he
moment.
edits,
It's probably not relevant to this kind of discussion, but so many of the designers that I've known, they would all love to experiment and do far more pieces. And if they've got the resource one season, they'll do it, and another season every single piece they can actually afford the money to get together goes on that runway. So it'll vary hugely, won't it?
What struck us most about this? Has it been the shapes? Has it been the softness? what's our kind of takeaway? Because we're coming towards the end, we've got a few more looks, and I want to build up to see the amazing final look, but what struck us the most? Is it
the maturity.
The maturity.
And confidence, for me.
Grown up clothes for powerful, strong vision of women.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, he still has his same, it's the same woman if you want. It's not the same type of woman, but it's the same woman. She's still powerful. She's just an incredibly powerful looking woman. I love designs that empower women. And I think that's something Gareth's always done in a very different way to nearly any other designer.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. That's really true. Because I feel that the term empowering women, it gets thrown around a lot, especially because we've got a lot of female designers showing at the moment. And I think sometimes people don't question it if they say, actually, does a Celine trouser suit that only looks good if you're completely flat-chested, 6 foot and a size 8, does that actually empower women? Or is it about doing something that's completely new? And I think that's what you said, Nick, then is really interesting about this idea of it empowering women, but in a very new way. And I don't think enough designers focus on empowerment. Is that the last look, Neil? Yeah. So let's go back to the last look.
Lovely, Gareth.
What do you think of that as a closing look? It's amazing.
Stunning. Would love to know exactly what that fabric is. It's just an absolutely superb, modern, strong, forward-looking, futuristic, slightly sci-fi edge kind of feel to it. It's really thrilling. What the kind of look that the stylist will be calling in for some great shoots, I'm sure.
Do you want to shoot that, Nick? What story is that making?
I quite like to shoot all of it, actually. I mean, what's interesting, Gareth, is there is a sort of desire for the future in him, and I think that's really important. So, he's pulling us as a culture towards the future, and that gets lost in some collections. You see some designers that are pulling us backwards, and I always find that very difficult in any art form, which actually it was better before that message goes out. But Gareth, it's always saying there's a better future, there's an exciting future, and this is the vision of it. And I think that's incredibly exciting for everybody, to be honest, to feel because that's an optimism. That's an optimism in creativity and an optimism in us as a species to say actually the future is going to be great, or there are some exciting things I want to see in the future. The future is going to be great. So there's so much of that which I find exciting. And then just I think in this collection the difference in those shapes.
Yeah.
The very hard and then the very soft.
I love what you said about optimism. I think that's so true. Do you think that as well? This is an optimistic
Well, no, I just
collection.
love the way you expressed that. I thought it was really original, and also we really need it right now. I think that there's a lot of negative press, there's a lot of negative kind of energy around, and to have that kind of view on things, I think it's really beautiful.
So our takeaway from the panel is more optimism and more fashion film. I think that's a brilliant note to end on. Very Show Studio.
Should we not give Gareth a clap?
Yeah, let's give Gareth a clap.